And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Just in case you're new here, I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest, covering the Oregon Ducks over on Fan Nation, part of the Sports Illustrated Network. It is Wednesday, March 6th, 2024, coming to you from a rainy Long Beach, California. I don't know what it is that we've been getting a bunch of rain lately. So a little bit of a rainy day here in Southern California, but I lived in the Northwest for 6 years. So I love the rain. I'm not going to hate. I'll take a rainy day for sure. But we're back here on the YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. Like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking about Oregon football, the NFL Combine. We're going to have some draft talk today, as well as Oregon recruiting and spring football gets going in Eugene next week. So if you guys have a mailbag question, throw that in the comments, and I'll do my best to maybe get to it on a future episode of the podcast. But always want to encourage you guys to let me know how you're feeling. And if you have any other mailbag questions, if you don't want to leave it on YouTube, you can also send it over DM on Twitter at @mtorressports. Our first headline of today's show: the recruiting dead period is over. I don't know about you guys, but it felt really slow this past month or so on the recruiting trail. I think one of the cool things is the more that you cover college football recruiting, you get a better feel with each year that goes by of what the recruiting calendar ultimately looks like, how it feels and whatnot. But ever since Matthew Johnson committed to Oregon in early February, that was Super Bowl weekend, it's been really quiet and it's been pretty uneventful for Oregon. But maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. You still have some coaches that are kind of moving around a little bit. Every now and then you see some stories about players planning to enter the transfer portal when it opens again in April next month for that spring window. And then you also have players that are, committing and decommitting from their programs, but it's been pretty smooth sailing for Dan Lanning and the Ducks. So there are some recruiting stories that we're going to be getting into. We're going to hit on a quarterback update as well as one of Oregon's top tight end targets here in the 2024 class. But just wanted to kind of get into some big picture thoughts as we kind of tackle Oregon recruiting coming out of the dead period here. So one thing for Oregon is I think that they're in a really good position as far as this 25 class goes, that I don't really think that there's any guys that they have to get on campus right this second. That's why they held those 2 junior days in January and February to get a lot of their top targets in the 2025 class, in many cases, back onto campus for a return visit, or in a couple of unique cases, out to Oregon for the first time. So I don't think that Oregon is by any means scrambling with any of their top prospects. I think that this staff is really dialed in, whether it's the on-field staffs or the assistants, the analysts, the recruiting department. They're dialed in, and I think that they have this calendar well within their sights, as chaotic as it is. So they're in a really good spot, I think, with a lot of their top guys. Got a couple specifics that I'm going to get into on today's episode of the podcast a little bit later on. So stick around for that. But some top prospects are going to hopefully be coming through Eugene here this month. Now that spring practices are set to get underway next week, they're going to have the pro day next week in Eugene as well. So that's probably the quietest part of the recruiting calendar, or maybe even the football calendar, versus or compared to the summer. I think even coming out of the spring game to the beginning of the season, we're still going to have some stuff to talk about, but we got through that. So let's get into our first recruiting update. Let's talk about 2025 Corona, California Centennial quarterback Hassan Longstreet. We got a little bit of news from him recently that he is going to be making his commitment in just a little bit over a month. As we know, Hassan Longstreet is the top uncommitted signal caller in the 2025 class. He released a top 8 with Hayes Fawcett. You have Oregon, UCLA, Auburn, Louisville, Michigan, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Miami. There were also some additional reports. I think it was from Greg Biggins, but I didn't see exactly who it was from, that Hassan Longstreet is looking into taking a trip out to Eugene between now and the time that he makes his actual college commitment. This was an interesting development just because, like I talked about, I believe on a recent episode of the podcast, if not, I wrote about it over on Ducks Digest, just this question of, does Oregon want to take 2 quarterbacks in the 2025 class? And I think this is a relevant topic to hit on, a question to ask here, because quarterbacks are so often the face of your recruiting class. And Oregon's added 3 quarterbacks to their roster just since the end of last season. They got Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma. They got Dante Moore out of the portal from UCLA. And then they added Luke Moga from the 2024 high school ranks. So that's a pretty significant amount of change to your quarterback room if you're Will Stein, just since the Fiesta Bowl against the Flames. That was, of course, Bo Nix's last game. So I think an Oregon fan would probably look at this and say, we probably don't need another quarterback, but there's no more. This is the most important position on the field. There's no doubt about that. And it's the position that you arguably have the most movement at. So I think it really makes sense for Oregon to keep tabs on Longstreet here. Just from the times that I've seen him, he's super, super physically gifted. The ball absolutely flies off his hand. But that being said, I think this last season was a growing season for him as far as just his processing speed and being comfortable in the pocket, or just being more comfortable when the play breaks down. Granted, the game that I saw him in person was, I believe, his first start with Centennial, and it was against Mater Dei. So that's about as hard of a first matchup as you could possibly ask for. So there's still obviously some work to be done in terms of his game, but he's 6 foot, about 190 pounds. And I think that Oregon isn't the favorite here necessarily. Like I kind of wrote, Texas A&M is a school that I believe is being mentioned more and more strongly in their connection with Longstreet, as new head coach Mike Elko looks to get a top signal caller in the fold here for the 2025 class. And as we know, a lot of top quarterbacks come out of Southern California. And as we know, Texas A&M is one of the heavy hitters on the recruiting trail. But Oregon's in a good spot when it comes to the quarterback position. I just wrote my spring football position preview over on Ducks Digest, so give that one a read if you haven't already. But the Ducks already have Achilles Smith Jr. out of San Diego, Linkon, Duck legacy, committed here in the 2025 class, but certainly does not hurt you to continue to stay involved with some of these top signal callers. Like we mentioned, Hassan Longstreet is the top uncommitted passer in the country now for 2025. So some final thoughts here. I don't think that Oregon is necessarily the team to beat in this recruitment. I'm feeling like it's pretty strong Texas A&M lean from kind of what I've been hearing, but we'll see what happens if he's going to be taking that trip out to Eugene. I think he's still one to keep an eye on. All right, what else do I have here on today's episode of the pod? We got a little rankings update, and one of Oregon's commits just made a big jump. We're talking about Matthew Johnson, 2025 edge rusher out of Concord, California, De La Salle High School. Like I said earlier in this episode, he is the most recent commit for Dan Lanning and company here in the 2025 class. Tosh Lapoy, De La Salle alum, played a big role in this recruitment, and I've heard a lot of really good things about Matthew Johnson since he committed to the Ducks. Just kind of talking with some of my connections out in Northern California. He's one of those athletic front defenders that we've seen Oregon go after in recent years, and he's an important commitment because the crop of defensive line talent just isn't super strong, quite frankly, out west. So you get a guy like him in the fold. I think he's someone you're really excited about, but also at the same time, I think we can kind of just be frank here. I think it's a guy that Oregon should get, right? With Tosh Lapoy and his connections at De La Salle, with the way that they have recruited the state of California, typically go into NorCal and get one of the top guys, if not the top guy, every cycle. This commitment just makes a lot of sense. I also like Oregon for Pittsburgh safety, Jaden Hudson in the 25 class, and I have since made my prediction for him to end up at Oregon. But the ratings jump for Matthew Johnson looks pretty significant in the top 247. It looks like in his history, he was ranked the number 404 player in the top 247. And as of Wednesday, he is now the number 198 player in the country. So a significant jump for Johnson. Had to mute myself there for just a second. Didn't want to have the sneeze on the show. But with Matt Johnson making this jump, I think it's a good indication for Oregon, because a lot of times I feel like Duck fans think they're on the other side of this, right? A guy commits to Oregon and then he sometimes goes down in the rankings and the ratings. And I really don't know what the deal is with that. I don't know if it has to do with any kind of bias that some of these sites maybe have for Oregon commits. I really don't know what it is. I don't work in rankings, so I'm glad I don't have to make that decision. But Matt Johnson is a guy I'm still really excited about for the Ducks. Really, really good pass rusher. He also plays tight end, I believe. I don't know actually if it's tight end. I think it's probably interior O-line. But he does play on offense as well for the Spartans. So he's a guy who plays a tremendous amount of snaps every game. And I think he's really going to be prepared well to make an impact once he gets to Oregon, seeing that De La Salle has a lot of really good coaches. In fact, Bob Ladouceur, former De La Salle head coach, not currently, but former De La Salle head coach, is going to be speaking rather at Oregon's upcoming coaches clinic. So that's kind of a cool De La Salle connection, but definitely good development on the recruiting trail for the Ducks that Matthew Johnson is on his way up. He is the lone defensive prospect committed to the Ducks in 2025. Other names to watch in 2025 include Trajan Odom, a D lineman out of North Carolina, originally from Inglewood, California. You also have Noah McHale and Madden Faremo as a pair of really talented linebackers from out here in Southern California. So I think that coming out of the dead period, I was expecting some more stuff to happen, even before the dead period for that matter, or during the dead period. But I think that once we get closer to April, that is when we are really going to see things start to get rolling for the Ducks here on the recruiting trail. Hopping into our next update, let's talk about 2025 tight end Linkon Cure. He is out of Goodland, Kansas, and he is one of the very best tight ends in the entire class. Goodland, Kansas, for the 6'6", 220-pound tight end. He remains a major target for Drew Maringer and the Ducks here in the 2025 class. And the Ducks are recruiting a ton of really talented tight ends here in the 25 class. And Cure isn't even the only one from the state of Kansas. The Ducks are also going after Hassan Longstreet out of Derby, Kansas, and what is a loaded class out of Kansas. It's not really a state that you often find mentioned with the heavy hitters, your Californias, your Texas, your Floridas, and they're not necessarily on that level this time around, but this is the strongest group of talent that we've seen from Kansas in quite some time. So what do we know about Linkon Cure? Well, the big update on Linkon Cure, he told me that he is going to be in Eugene for Oregon's spring game. That is, of course, scheduled for April 27th. A couple other visits that he passed along. You have March 23rd going out to Texas A&M, March 30th, Kansas, April 11th, Kansas State. And then he also has one official visit scheduled to Kansas State on June 21st. And man, when I was talking to Linkon Cure, he was saying all the right things about Oregon. He was saying that he loves absolutely everything about Oregon. I'll have the full story up on Ducks Digest before too long, so you'll get full quotes on that one in the near future, let's call it. But I'm really excited about what Oregon has here in the 25 class as far as the tight end position goes. You have Linkon Cure out of Kansas. You have Hassan Longstreet also out of Kansas. Feel really good about where the Ducks stand for him. Probably better than how they stand for Linkon Cure, but two really talented tight ends out of Kansas. You also have Nate Roberts out of Washington, Oklahoma. He's another guy that the Ducks stayed in the mix for, but Ohio State looks like a team that still has some pretty solid momentum there. But Oregon's doing everything they can with Linkon Cure. They had multiple visits. I want to say during the contact period, you had Stein, Maringer, and Lanning all make their way out to Goodland, Kansas to visit with Linkon Cure. And tight end's a really important spot for the Ducks here in the 2025 class, right? You got to think that you're losing Terrence Ferguson, you're losing Patrick Herbert after the 2024 season, and you got to just keep adding talented playmakers, certainly at tight end, to your roster. And it's not a position that we've seen Oregon necessarily sign a bunch of really touted guys at every single year, because it's not a position that necessarily has a ton of, All Americans or 5-star guys on a year-to-year basis. So it kind of seems like, compared to other positions, that the pool is smaller just to get some really special players. But they did add Roger Saliapaga and AJ Pugliano from the 2024 class, and they also had Kenyon Sadiq out of Idaho in the 23 class, and he saw some decent playing time as a true freshman. But I think Linkon Cure is right there at the top of the board for Drew Maringer here in the 2025 class. He plays his 7-on-7 ball with Hassan Brame as well, I might add, with California Power. So they've been going all over the country. He was telling me that some of these trips he's going to be taking, he's going to, go with his 7-on-7 team and kind of hit up where they're at in those local tournaments, right, for some of his top schools. And he's a guy that you need to know. I've been talking about him for a while, but when I interviewed him, I said, man, yeah, it's really just feels like it's taken off since we last spoke. And that was well over a month ago. So you're seeing a lot of really big time schools hop in the mix here for Linkon Cure as he kind of navigates his recruitment. Latest on a decision timeline for Linkon Cure. He wants to take those official visits before he makes a final decision, but that decision is expected to come before his senior season. So expect that probably sometime before the end of August, seeing that that's when most of the football season gets underway. But just to give you guys up to speed on some more schools that have offered within the last 2 months, you have USC hopping in for Linkon Cure, Michigan State, Colorado, UCLA, Miami, and then the biggest one recently, less than a week ago, Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns hopped in. So Oregon has no shortage of competition here for Linkon Cure. But I think that if Terrence Ferguson has a strong year and maybe can make some noise in the NFL draft, I think that's going to continue to help them look more and more appealing for top tight end prospects moving forward. Welcome back to the Ducks Dish Podcast. Sipping a little bit of coffee here on a Wednesday afternoon. Let's talk about the NFL Combine, 2024 NFL Combine recap, and what it means for Oregon. Oregon sent 7 prospects, 7 players out to Indianapolis, Lucas Oil Stadium for the 2024 NFL Combine, and overall they had a really solid showing. The 3 guys that are kind of generating the most buzz right now from Oregon ahead of next month's draft, you have Jackson Powers Johnson, who is the top center in this draft. I think that his performance in Indianapolis only solidified that. Not to really say he needed to have a top day, but I think after getting a little bit banged up, re-aggravating the injury in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, he's a guy who was probably really, really looking forward to the Combine to just put his best foot forward and have a healthy showing before the draft. But that being said, the Ducks do have their pro day next week, so we'll probably see a lot of these guys in action once again. But Jackson Powers Johnson did a great job. I think the buzz coming out of the draft is that he's just incredibly athletic and physical. We got to hear a little bit about his Jack's Burger, which is served locally in Eugene. So I think his stock went up, if nothing else. I think I saw in a recent draft, I saw him going to the Rams. I also saw him going to the Miami Dolphins. So I think that those are 2 really good spots for him either way. You also obviously have Bo Nix. Bo Nix was a guy who did most of the events. Actually, I want to say that he mainly just, threw, which is big. He measured in at 6'2", 214 pounds. So he didn't record a time in the 40 or the vertical or the broad jump. Maybe we'll see him do those events in Eugene next week. But a lot of top quarterbacks in this draft class didn't throw. Caleb Williams didn't throw. Jaden Daniels, didn't throw. Drake May, he didn't throw. So for a guy like Bo Nix, I think that kind of helps, right? If you have a lot of these top guys that aren't throwing, but you have an opportunity to go out there and compete and just show your stuff again, why wouldn't you take it? And I think that it's just when we're seeing these players not do the interviews or not do the drills, I feel like it's just a new era, maybe where we're at, where the players are kind of dictating things in a way that they really haven't in the past. But I like Bo Nix throwing in this combine, and I think he did really well. I know I did see one pass where he couldn't sync up with Troy Franklin, so that would have been cool, the duck to duck connection. But Bo Nix did really well. I think he made all the throws that you want to see. Definitely didn't hurt his draft stock. The big talking point now has to do with one of his possible landing spots, right? The Denver Broncos. I wonder if the Denver Broncos would want to take him in the 2024 NFL draft, because they just released Russell Wilson. And what a head scratching decision that contract extension was. But whatever, that's what happens. So some people are talking about Bo Nix to link up with Sean Payton in Denver, and that would definitely be an intriguing position for them. The Broncos currently have the number 9 pick in the draft. Got to figure that they're going to want to take a quarterback. And this latest one from NFL.com, Lance Zierlein, he has J.J. McCarthy from Michigan going to the Broncos. But I think that Bo Nix he showcased his talents once again. It's obviously a phenomenal quarterback draft, but I think that he is still going to be potentially in the conversation to be a first-round talent, even though there are so many talented guys in this draft. Some of them I just talked about. So not a whole lot to report on Bo Nix from the scouting combine, but I think he had a good showing as well, watching him perform. And then Troy Franklin, Oregon's star wide receiver, potentially the best wide receiver we've ever seen come through Eugene. He had a pretty solid day, ran a 4.41 in his 40. I don't believe he took a second attempt at the 40-yard dash. Would have been fun to see him maybe break that 4.3 range, but we saw Xavier Worthy from Texas set the new record in the 40-yard dash with a 4.21, displacing former Washington wide receiver, or passing former Washington wide receiver John Ross, who had that 4.22. But Troy Franklin did a pretty good job out in Indianapolis. And getting a little bit more into my draft combine recap story over on Ducks Digest, he got a 6.4 out of 8 draft grade from NFL.com, which will become a good starter within 2 years. He measured in at just about 6'2", and this was a little surprising to me, 176 pounds. So 11 pounds lighter than he was listed on the roster this past year, but ran that 4.41, had a 39-inch vertical and a 10'4" broad jump. So I think that he did a really good job and continue to show that he has great hands and is a good route runner. A lot of people were making some comments about how he was weaving in the gauntlet drill as opposed to having straight line speed, but I don't think that there's too much to make of that. I think he's still a really solid receiver, and I'd love to see him end up at a good team. I saw him mocked to the Dolphins and also saw him mocked to the Chiefs, and what a great landing spot that would be for Franklin to land with the defending Super Bowl champions. Couple other guys to discuss real quick. I mean, those are the main ones that are drawing the most attention, but Brandon Dorlus did really well. The Oregon defensive lineman ran a 4.85, and that was the number 2 time along defensive lineman. Jumped a 30.5-inch vertical. And I think that he helped himself out. Wasn't an insane performance where it's like, man, that guy's just a freak. I think if there was one of those events that he took part in, it would be his 40-yard dash. But I think he did a good job showcasing his ability, moving between the bags, his start and stop ability. I think he's someone that is going to be a steal for an NFL team when it comes to the draft in April. Kyrie Jackson, the Oregon cornerback, he measured in at 6'4", 194 pounds, and ran a 4.5 40-yard dash. And he also jumped 36.5 inches with an 11-foot 1-inch broad jump. I think Kyrie Jackson might have made himself a little bit of money running that kind of a 40 time at 6'4" and almost 195 pounds. That's notable. I mean, when you think 4'5" with a corner, you're not always super impressed, but Jackson is a unique athlete given that he is so tall. But I think that he had a pretty solid day overall. and hopefully he can follow in the long line of Oregon DBs that have done a pretty good job over the recent years in the NFL. Look at Javon Holland, look at Christian Gonzalez. Guys like that are having a big impact in the NFL, even though Christian Gonzalez got hurt almost right away and his rookie season was cut short. Bucky Irving, Oregon's running back, he had a 6.17 out of 8 grade. Good backup with the potential to develop into a starter. Measured in at 5'9", 192 pounds, and ran a 4.55. So I think that Bucky, with his 40, that might have been a time that would surprise some people, but he's never really been billed as this speedster. He was a guy that ran through contact, that could cut on a dime, that could be creative and improvise with his runs, and only needed a little sliver of space to make something happen. And it was really good catching the ball out of the backfield. So his routes looked great, caught the ball well in Indianapolis. And I think he could kind of be a little bit of a diamond in the rough in this draft class. Then you have Evan Williams. Gosh, how many times have I done that? Evan Williams, the younger brother of former Oregon safety Bennett Williams. Evan Williams was out there. He got a 5.8 out of 8, an average backup or special teamer. He weighed in at 200 pounds and measured in at 5'11". Ran a 4.6, but jumped really well. 40.5-inch vertical and a 10'6" broad jump. So I think that his speed wasn't necessarily elite among defensive backs, but again, I don't think people thought he had crazy high-end speed. But now he's a guy who has continued to raise his stock really since the end of the season. He got invited to the Senior Bowl and had an interception, so that's great for him. And then he performed well in Indianapolis. So now he's going to look to continue building that momentum with a strong showing at Oregon's Pro Day in Eugene. Again, that's scheduled for March 12th. Now let's talk about what it means for Oregon to wrap up today's episode of the pod. I said this a couple years ago. I think it was when Kayvon Thibodeau was coming out of Oregon. And I think it still stands to some degree. Let me know what you guys think. The NFL draft, as it stands right now, is Oregon's best recruiting pitch because they don't have a national championship. That's one part of it. They don't have necessarily as lengthy, or as decorated of a history as some of these blue blood programs do. Whether you're looking at your Alabamas, your Ohio States, Oklahomas, schools like that, they're kind of a new age program. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think it makes them fun, makes them darn fun to cover because a lot of things that they're kind of doing year to year sometimes become firsts for the program. And I think that when I do these recruiting interviews, guys want to know that they're going to be going to a school that is going to develop them, that is going to get the most out of them, that's going to get them to the highest level of football. And every draft that comes by, Oregon's sending more and more guys to the league. And granted, you can still get value out of that from like some not undrafted free agents, but in general, you want a guy to get drafted to get that buzz, to get Oregon in the headline, right? And he got 7 rounds to make it happen. So Oregon can do something special in this draft because I think there is a chance that we see Oregon have 3 first-rounders. I at least saw one mock draft from Pro Football Focus that had Bo Nix, Troy Franklin, and Jackson Powers-Johnson all going in the first round. Is that likely? I'm not so sure. I think that they're definitely – I would feel confident about them getting 2 guys in the first round, something that they haven't done since 2015 when the Ducks had Marcus Mariota, who went number 2, I believe it was, the Tennessee Titans, and DeForest Buckner, the prolific defensive lineman, who went 17 to my San Francisco 49ers. So every draft that comes and goes, it's a big opportunity for Oregon to make a splash, for Oregon to be in the headlines, for some of these recruits that maybe aren't even on Oregon's radar yet, or maybe they're even just younger kids that are playing football, to see that Oregon O and to associate Oregon just a little bit more with the NFL. I know that Oregon is still kind of chasing some of these historic teams, like I've mentioned, and I'm not trying to say that in a bad way. I think that Oregon's going to continue to close the gap and make up ground every year. That's certainly what it's looking like with the way that Dan Lanning's recruiting, with the way that he is developing players. him and Will Stein. Obviously, his work with Bo Nix was incredible. Junior Adams and his work with Troy Franklin was great. Alik Terry working with Jackson Powers Johnson, a Remington Trophy Award winner. That's a feather that he's going to be able to put into his cap. So Oregon had 7 guys go to the combine. They'll get one more chance to make their best possible pitch. Maybe even some of these guys that didn't get invited to the combine, we could see them try to make some noise out there in Eugene for the program's annual pro day. But it's a fun time right now. I know it feels a little bit dead, but I think it's going to get rolling. I'm going to get some spring football preview content, some spring preview stories and podcasts and videos on my YouTube channel and on Ducks Digest. And I want you guys to be a part of it. So make sure you're following me on Twitter and Instagram at mtorres sports. Subscribe to my YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. Read me over at ducksdigest.com and share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. But until next time, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.